So I finally got round to watching James Gunn's Superman, and, I kind of enjoyed it at the time, but the more I reflect on it, the worse I think it is. I'll explain why. There are certainly things I like about Superman 2025. Guy Gardner is kind of amusing, although I don't think he should be in the film. I find Eve funny and endearing. The way in which she's infatuated with Jimmy Olsen, but he can barely stand to be around her, yet she's kind of out of his league, makes for an entertaining dynamic. But I was also rooting for him to realise how sweet she was, and to fulfil her desire for them to be together, which is seemingly subtly implied to happen at the end of the film, I think. I also enjoyed Kara's appearance at the end of the film. I like this new interpretation of her as a reckless party girl within the specific confines of this more light-hearted, silly universe. Outside that, it wouldn't work, but it does here. There are a few other things I enjoyed about the film, but unfortunately they're outweighed by all the criticisms I have of it, which I'll now get into. Firstly, the film has a pretty odd pace and plot structure. In the first act, it has some very long dialogue scenes, specifically the scene where Lois interviews Superman, which just goes on and on and on and on. The thing is, the scene is actually one of the more interesting the film has to offer, because it shows the characters debating something of substance in great detail, the kind of substance the rest of the film sorely lacks. But still, the scene is absurdly long. The other long dialogue scene in this act, or at least one that felt very long, is where Lex is in a room of military and government officials, talking about stuff to do with Superman. This scene really dragged for me, and I kind of tuned out towards the end of it, hence I don't remember the details of it that well. But then, after this dragged out start in the first act, the film just almost never takes any time to breathe, with so much action right to the end. It's such an odd speed ramp of a plot, and when the pacing is so off like this, it compounds the other problems with the film. There are multiple points of backstory that come up in passing that have the potential to make for a much more interesting plot than the film actually had. The first is when Superman explains to Lois how he prevented a war between Baravia and Jarampur by smashing Baravia's military equipment to halt their invasion of Jarampur, then flying the leader of Baravia out to the desert and pressuring him to abandon his invasion plans with a threat. All of those off-screen events sound much more interesting than the on-screen events that unfold after this, and it's similar with this other thing. The reveal that Superman's Kryptonian parents sent him to Earth to conquer the planet rather than save it. This gets the public to turn against Superman, and makes him question who he is. But I'd have preferred a whole film about that one aspect, going into the reason Kryptonians advocate for this kind of tyranny. A proper, deeper drama for Superman about how he deals with it, and whether he has to resist the urge to use his power to conquer, since that would be a way to stop crime. His arc concluding with overcoming this temptation, and recognising the value of letting humanity govern themselves, or something like that. But no, we just got teased with the allusion to more interesting stories than the one on screen. When it got to the point where there was a tear in the fabric of reality making its way to Metropolis, and all the heroes had to band together to do a bunch of stuff to stop it, I was just like, ugh. This device. I never like the whole natural disaster threat at the end of this kind of film. To me, that's boring. I want the climactic battle to be centred around the conflict between characters, or a fight with other combatants. There is fighting alongside trying to stop the disaster, but our attention is divided between that and the natural disaster stuff. I think the reason I don't like that natural disaster device is because no one's in control of it. It's just a thing that's happening, disconnected from the conflict between the heroes and villains. I contrast it with the climax of Man of Steel, which I do like, where Superman and the military have to destroy the Kryptonian world engines before they terraform Earth. Metropolis is getting levelled by the world engines as they terraform, and this is essentially a natural disaster, but it's different, because the world engines are machines deployed by Zod with a specific purpose. They're essentially weapons his army is using to wipe out humanity, and Superman has to engage with them as such. So his battle to destroy them is an extension of his conflict with the film's antagonist, rather than a distraction from it, like in Superman 2025. Another problem the film has is its villains. Ultraman is totally wasted in this film. He's a cool and interesting character when used right. Smallville does some cool stuff with him actually, but in this Superman film, he's just a henchman, which is a bit of a disservice to the character. Spoiler alert for the boys' comics here. I find it amusing how Ultraman is used in the same way Black Noir is used in the boys' comics. Ultraman is dressed like Black Noir, face covered by a mask, and later takes off his mask to reveal he's a clone of Superman. Black Noir eventually unmasks to reveal he's a clone of Homelander. I also find it amusing that Ultraman's unmasking is framed as this shocking reveal because I was already familiar with the Ultraman character before this film and knew that he's an alternate version of Superman. There's what's intended to be a mystery as to how Lex Luthor could gain access to the Fortress of Solitude, since it's programmed to only open when Superman's DNA is detected. But I assumed immediately that Lex was able to enter the fortress because he had Ultraman with him. I know the reveal was probably more for the general audience who might not have known who Ultraman was, but still, it's funny to me. And now about Lex. Nicholas Hoult is a good actor, but his Lex Luthor is just a one-dimensional shouting machine of a villain. While he does state his motivations for hating Superman, they're not really dramatised in any way, so we're not shown any experiences his character has that lead him to his beliefs, and inform his villainous goals. As a result, he just comes across as evil for the sake of being evil. I think he's actually one of the worst aspects of the film because of all that. Next, there are too many characters in this film, and that causes various problems. Firstly, it means you don't get enough time with the core Superman characters, and they don't get to interact enough with Superman. Lois Lane is a notable victim of this. At the start of the film, it seems like she's being set up to have at least a serviceable character arc, but after a certain point, she's just kind of there. She gets a lot of screen time and goes on a mission to try and rescue Superman when he's been captured, but for some reason it just feels a bit hollow. There's also not enough time dedicated to her and Clark interacting with each other, in my opinion. Another problem with having so many characters is that their inclusion in the story, with their various subplots, makes for too much stuff going on. So there's no room to properly explore any of the ideas presented. Like Jor-El and Lara's message, telling Kal-El to conquer Earth, or the ethics of Superman intervening to stop the war between Baravia and Jarampur, or the character drama of Clark and Lois's relationship, or the cloning of Superman to make Ultraman. God, when you list it all out like that, it really is overstuffed. Any of these stories would have been more interesting to focus on individually, but because they're all crammed in amongst a load of other stuff that's going on, divided between so many characters, we get no real substance for any of it. The film is trying to do too much, so can't do enough in any one area. Another problem is that so many of the characters are other superheroes. The fact that there are so many superheroes in this film detracts from the significance of Superman in the world, and the questions his existence raises for humanity. It means that Superman doesn't even feel particularly special. He's just another superhuman amongst the crowd, and isn't even really a moral leader. That leads me on to the next problem with this film, and that is what it has to say about morality. Superman is meant to be a paragon of morality, the ultimate superhero that other heroes defer to for moral leadership. There are versions of the character that steer away from this, but in his own film, this moral exemplar portrayal is expected. Of course, since this is the first in a series of films, maybe sequels will build up to that. But based on how many superheroes there already are in this film, I wouldn't necessarily expect that to happen. All the superheroes in this film follow their own moral code, and Superman's doesn't sway them in any way. He's not providing a moral example that guides the people of this universe and guides the moral direction of the film. The other heroes who go against Superman's moral code by killing their enemies aren't challenged on that in any meaningful way. In fact, their way of doing things is almost presented as an equivalent alternative to Superman's, or possibly even superior to some extent, because their willingness to kill is what protects people from the kaiju that's released and takes down the dictator of Baravia. After he's killed by Hawkgirl, there's no interrogation of her actions or questions raised about them at all. She just goes into a foreign country, executes their leader, and that all plays into the happy ending the film builds to. Superman is presented as a hero whose unwillingness to kill gets in the way of him being able to protect people properly. The other heroes around him, who are willing to get their hands dirty and kill, pick up the slack left by Superman here, as they do what's necessary or pragmatic while he's too afraid to. This kind of shows that, intuitively, James Gunn understands that in these dangerous battle situations where people need protecting, killing would be unavoidable sometimes. But he has a problem, because he knows that Superman is not allowed to kill. So Gunn just ends up not really contending with this issue properly, clumsily trying to have his cake and eat it too, with dangerous creatures and bad people getting killed when it's necessary, or arguably just, but the plot protecting Superman from having to be the one to do it. Zack Snyder understood this moral issue, and in his DC films, treated it with the weight it deserves. In Man of Steel, Superman has an aversion to killing. He is a compassionate person who doesn't want to have to kill, but is put in a situation where it's unavoidable, having to kill Zod to stop him killing civilians. Making that hard choice is devastating for Superman, and his anguish is on display as a result. This film confronts the moral issue at hand, addressing the rule of Superman not being able to kill and demonstrating why that is unsustainable. If you had to sum up the moral message of Superman 2025, whatever you'd say could probably be rapidly picked apart because of all the conflicting elements of the story. It's just all over the place. Some of the moral lessons learned or examples set by Superman are cancelled out by the actions of other characters in other parts of the film. In conclusion, Superman 2025, to a certain extent, is the stereotype of a heavily test-screened film. What's the point of it? Just to be a bit of silly fun, basically. And that can be fine, we all enjoy that from time to time, but in this case, to me, it feels kinda cheap and frivolous. It's shallow, throwaway entertainment that probably won't leave any lasting impact on most people who watch it. A complete waste of the iconic IP it's utilising, and the massive resources pumped into it that could have been used to make something actually meaningful, actually artistically worthwhile, like the Snyder films. Overall, Superman 2025 is fine, but I think it might prove to be quite forgettable. It does leave me just about enthusiastic enough for sequels, but for the film itself, I don't really have any enthusiasm to return to it. Anyway, what do you think? Do you agree with the points I've made here, or do you like the film? Let me know in the comments below. Leave a like if you want to, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, see you next time.